Omos. He's 7 foot 3 inches tall, a whopping 460-pound giant, and one of the largest superstars in WWE history. He's been in WWE for nearly 5 years as of this video, and it seems like he's been sitting on the sidelines for a good part of it. But it wasn't always that way. Omos was a champion and was clearly poised to be one of WWE's top stars for the future, but it hasn't panned out that way. Was it the change in regimes within WWE that affected Omos? Was it other superstars being given the focus and spotlight instead of him? Or has he not lived up to the expectations? Join us as we look into the rise and fall of Omos.
You think you know all the wrestling stories? There's more you haven't heard yet. Join us on Backstage Pass.
For a guy that tall, you'd have to imagine that his growth as a child wasn't exactly conventional. Omos told Ryan Satin, formerly of Fox Sports, that by the time he was 11, he was already 6 foot tall. He grew another 3 inches during puberty, and after he turned 13, he shot up. By the time he was 15 years old, Omos was already 6 foot 11 inches tall. He had a love for art, telling the New York Times that he wanted to be the African Vincent van Gogh. He wasn't a naturally gifted athlete, which is an assumption many would make looking at his size. According to Omos himself, his brother, who was much smaller than him, was a freak athlete while Omos had to figure out how to be athletic. Basketball gave him the tools for that. But before basketball came into his life, it was his aunt who introduced him and his brother to tennis. But as his height kept coming, it was pretty clear to those around him that basketball would suit him better. Even then, when he went into a basketball tryout camp at 13 years old, the recruiters were shocked at the sight of a 13-year-old kid being 6'5". His lack of athleticism meant that he completely fumbled in that camp, but he showed the desire and willingness to keep learning, something that remains with him to this day. Still, by the age of 15, he managed to get a scholarship and attended school in Chesapeake, Virginia, where he honed in his basketball skills. His improving basketball abilities got him into the University of South Florida. Omos stood out because of his height, but not too long into his tenure at the University of South Florida, an official from the college in a higher-up position sent an email CCing Omos's coach. He noticed that there was something abnormal about him, and it wasn't his height. Instead, he suggested that Omos may have a pituitary tumor. A pituitary tumor is a benign or non-cancerous tumor that's usually formed at the base of the skull, according to Moffitt Cancer Center. Omos had to undergo surgery to remove the tumor from his nose. Omos brushed it off but went back to take his MRI anyway to give himself some peace of mind. One day, he was sent directly to the coach's office, where his coach, the president of the university, and a bunch of other doctors were sitting. The doctors had his MRI on display and pointed out a speck in his brain, telling him it was a tumor. Incidentally, the doctors performing the surgery discovered that Omos, who was then just Jordan, had acromegaly. Acromegaly is what can lead to an excessive or abnormal growth spurt because of excessive hormone production. Do you know who else had that? Andre the Giant. But apart from just that similarity, what Omos had that Andre didn't is giantism and something known as partial Cushing's disease. Not only was that a side effect, but he also had visibility issues growing up. Because of all these issues, his body produced no testosterone. To this day, he has to take testosterone to help him. It taught him a very valuable life lesson, that he can't control everything. The entire process of moving to the United States was quite an uphill battle for a 15-year-old kid. He was supposed to be joined by his mother and younger brother, but due to immigration complications, Omos was the only one sent through by himself because he had a scholarship in hand. He was supposed to go to a school in Florida, but a series of circumstances led him to moving to Virginia instead. One of the big challenges for him in Virginia was the fact that it was so cold. For a Nigerian, humidity, rain, and scorching heat are more familiar weather conditions. So when you put someone used to those conditions in a place where it snows, it's quite hard to adapt. And then there was the entire medical situation he had. His doctors straight up told him that he was months away from being blind or having a possible heart attack. But in a way, coming to the United States may have actually saved his life because now he had actual access to good medical care. But unfortunately, the toll it took on his body was too much, and his fortunes in basketball didn't work out as he hoped. He ended up moving into his girlfriend's parents' house. With his girlfriend pursuing a career in the medical field, he felt like he was just withering away. A friend of Omos named Antoine Pozniak connected him with a local wrestling promoter named Steve Kieran. Kieran treated the broken Omos to a meal and told him he would become a millionaire in just 4 years if he got into wrestling. Kieran also had direct contact with Canyon Seaman, the director of talent development at WWE. It was 2014 and he was just 20 years old, but he never made that call even when he was in a position where it almost couldn't get any worse for him. But a few years later, after a lot of soul searching, Omos sent Canyon an email, then went a whole week with no reply. It was on a Sunday night that he got his reply from Canyon asking if he was busy. Thankfully, Omos was not busy, and Canyon told him to be in Orlando in 2 days. In the New York Times feature about him, Omos explained the stark contrast between basketball and wrestling. In basketball, he wasn't allowed to be too tough and felt caged in because he couldn't be physical even in the spirit of athletics. If you've followed WWE and professional wrestling for a while, you know that it's the complete opposite. Speaking to Chris Van Vliet, he said that he wasn't mentally ready for the tryout at the time and he needed to fully exhaust his options in basketball before making the jump to WWE. In his first official tryout in 2018, he instantly fell in love with wrestling. The grueling physicality that drives rookies and aspiring wrestlers away was something Omos embraced. The potential was so clear that WWE head coach Matt Bloom, who some of you might remember as A-Train or Albert, pulled Omos aside and told him that if he wanted, he had a job. The next day, Omos met with one of the most powerful men in the wrestling industry, Triple H. The game told Omos exactly what Matt Bloom said. If he wanted, the job was his. The timing was perfect and it was too good of an offer to refuse. When Triple H texted Canyon's phone asking what the big man thought, Omos had only 2 words to say: "I'm in." According to Matt Bloom, the fact that Omos was restricted from getting too physical in the basketball court was beneficial because it also made him safe in the ring. Just like Braun Strowman a few years before him, Omos was meant to be an NXT star. Even Matt Bloom said that the reason why guys like him get fast-tracked to the main roster is because of how rare they are. There's no doubt that Omos has been a head-turner wherever he's gone because of his physical presence, so it's no surprise that Vince McMahon wanted the Nigerian giant in his ranks on the main roster and he wanted him quickly. To do that, WWE went an identical route to what they did with Braun Strowman. They had Omos wrestle exclusively on house shows. It was a few months into the pandemic, or the Thunderdome era of WWE, when he got his first appearance on national television. He was briefly slotted in the role of Akira Tozawa's Ninja, a comedic bit that didn't last very long. When Shane McMahon brought the doomed Raw Underground to WWE television, Omos' face was shown properly as he was the bodyguard for the dingy fight arena. In October, he got another call to be on Monday Night Raw, but by that point, Raw Underground had flopped and was finished. He was told that he would be doing an angle with the phenomenal AJ Styles and was told to get a suit. After scrambling all over parts of Orlando to get a suit that would fit someone of his stature, he finally decided to wear a turtleneck and got Vince McMahon's personal approval. He finally got his big break as AJ Styles Muscle. It was the perfect role for him. By that point, he already knew that for him, especially, less was more. He didn't need to say much. He didn't need to do much. He just needed to have an imposing presence. While it was an unmistakable bodyguard role that Omos had, AJ Styles began to put him over by reacting with fear to the feats of strength that the Nigerian giant could pull off. The investment that AJ Styles made by having Omos on his side began to pay off. His presence with AJ Styles' WWE title match against Drew McIntyre may not have gotten him the title, but he prevented, or rather delayed, The Miz from becoming a 2-time WWE champion. After making his presence known on shows like Royal Rumble and Elimination Chamber without even officially participating in a match, there was a lot of anticipation for his in-ring debut. The build-up to WrestleMania 37 was kind of all over the place because of how quickly and abruptly matches were put together, but Omos was a direct beneficiary of this. It was announced that his in-ring televised debut would be at the grandest stage of them all, and it would be for the Raw Tag Team Championship. Even the legendary New Day duo of Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods couldn't stop him, and WrestleMania 37 turned into the Omos show, when he almost single-handedly won the Raw Tag Team titles. There weren't exactly big plans for the tag team division on the Raw side of things, so he had AJ Styles continue to dominate until SummerSlam, when the RK Bro duo of Randy Orton and Matt Riddle dethroned them. Every time Omos was in a losing position, he was never pinned. Towards the end of 2021, as he and AJ Styles hit their year together as partners, tensions began brewing underneath the surface. On the second to last episode of Raw in 2021, he would finally turn on AJ Styles, breaking him free and setting him up for a singles run. Despite breaking up, the two remain good friends to this day. AJ Styles has been and continues to be a mentor to Omos. The biggest thing that AJ taught Omos was to have killer instinct. After beating AJ Styles on Raw, he participated in the Royal Rumble and it took a whopping 6 men to take him out. Heading into WrestleMania 38 season, Bobby Lashley was one of wrestling's hottest superstars, coming off his second reign as WWE Champion. So to be put in a spot where he would face Lashley in a singles match was an incredible step ahead. Even in defeat, it made a lot of sense for Lashley to be the first man to pin him, and it didn't hurt him at all. When MVP turned on Bobby Lashley the next night on Raw to align with Omos, things were looking up. MVP's pairing with Omos wasn't under the best circumstances. Vince McMahon got MVP backstage and told him that he wanted to see Bobby Lashley on his own, and he wanted MVP to do for Omos what he did for Lashley. According to MVP, Triple H was absolutely determined that he didn't want another big show. He wanted him to be a special attraction. It was also the period when WWE was transitioning into the post-Vince McMahon era. It gave a lot of positive things for WWE stars to look forward to, but there was always going to be a crop of talent whose careers would be negatively affected as a side effect of the change in regime and overall vision. Still, his feud with Bobby Lashley continued on after WrestleMania 38, and he picked up a win over him at WrestleMania Backlash before losing their final bout, a handicap match where Omos and MVP faced Bobby Lashley. Lashley was just a lot hotter at the time, while Omos was still a newcomer with minimal television experience, so it made a lot of sense for the Almighty to get the last laugh. The next few months just breezed by without him doing much except for a Money in the Bank ladder match appearance. His next major feud was against the returning Braun Strowman, with the two set to face off in a clash of titans at Crown Jewel in Saudi Arabia. It was a tough call to make as to who should have won the match. On one hand, you have the returning Braun Strowman, a guy who was a former Universal Champion and a regular main eventer for 3 years. On the other hand, you had the less proven, greener Omos who had the potential but was far from realizing it. We don't know what exactly was behind the decision to have Braun Strowman win, but Omos was left on the receiving end of another losing feud. That killed a lot of his momentum. At that point, he wasn't featured in any storyline and his popularity rose because of his social media presence. The line between fiction and reality in wrestling isn't as blurred in 2024, so fans got an insight into the real personality of Jordan, Omos' real name. They saw him for what he was, a gentle giant and an all-around good person in the ring. People started proclaiming themselves as Omos Sapiens, and it seemed to take off. Not to mention that before his match against Braun Strowman at Crown Jewel, there was a video posted online that showed Omos surprising his family in Nigeria by visiting for the first time in 14 years. It was a beautiful moment showing him reuniting with his family, all of whom looked like completely regular-sized people. When seeing videos like that and other social media posts showing his personality, it's hard not to get behind him. It also raises the question of why that part of him hadn't been tapped into. You can argue that considering how dominant big guy scary trope has been done to death in WWE, it would probably have been better to just have Omos be himself and allow him to connect with the audience. He wasn't getting any TV time, but when WrestleMania season came again in 2023, he found himself in an unexpectedly great spot. It was reported that Brock Lesnar didn't have much interest in working with Bray Wyatt, but he had a lot of interest in working with Omos. When Brock Lesnar's in a match, it usually has him as Goliath and his opponent as David. But in one rare moment in his career, Lesnar was the David to Omos' Goliath. It was a pretty good match for what it was, with Omos manhandling the Beast Incarnate before eventually losing. It didn't make Omos look bad at all, but just to be put in that spot should have been a sign of things to come. Lesnar worked with Omos in a way to give back to the business, while for the Nigerian Giant, it was a pleasant surprise to work with someone of that caliber. The next month, he was announced for a very random match against Seth Rollins, but he lost again. This seemed to be a downward trend for Omos, who was being used to prop up other superstars. It wasn't the best way to utilize him, and taking him off of television for extended periods of time wasn't exactly helping either. Now that MVP is gone from WWE, it leaves a lot of questions about what's next for Omos. The unfortunate reality about Omos' situation is that there's the potential for so much more. By all accounts, he's a coachable, open-minded, and big-hearted human being with quite a character outside the ring. It can be translated to success in the ring, but he just hasn't been given the chance to do that. There's always been that saying that WWE is the land of giants, and in a way it is, not as much as it used to be, but it historically has been. But when it came to the real giants, there's always been some type of curse. More often than not, the largest superstar on the roster have historically been victims of typecasting. In reality, the 6 foot to 6'5" range is the most ideal size to get a big push, and beyond that, only a few have made major exceptions. Omos has the potential to be one of those exceptions, but he needs to be given the opportunity to do so. We can only hope that his extended hiatus is meant for a bigger storyline being put in place. Perhaps WWE needs to move past the trope of him being a dominant giant and embrace his personality to fit in with the current times. With WWE moving to Netflix for Raw, we can only hope that there are bigger plans for the Nigerian Giant and the powers that be recognize what they have with him. Guys like Omos don't come around often, so we hope that when we make another video about him, the title's gonna be The Rise and Fall and Rise Again of Omos. Thank you for watching, Omos Sapiens.